Hey everyone, the Master Viewer here, and today joining me is the franchise Shane Douglas, star of the new movie Pro Wrestlers vs. Zombies. Thanks for coming, Shane.
Hey, it's great being here. Good talking with you.
Tell us a little about the movie.
Well, the movie itself is written and directed by a gentleman named Cody Knotts. Cody had come up to me 3 or 4 years ago, give or take, and introduced himself that he had graduated from the same college I did, Bethany College in West Virginia. He was a freshman there when I was a senior. Of course, on campus, it was a small campus. People knew who I was because I was the head of the student government, and I was wrestling professionally at the time, and so well known around campus. And he came to me at this poor convention in Monroeville, Pennsylvania, several years back, and said that he had an idea for a movie, and he'd like to get my phone number and email to stay in touch with me once he finished it. I gave it to him, never expecting to hear from him again because, excuse me, in this business we hear that all the time. So I thought I'll give him my information and I'll never hear from him again. And about 6 months later, he had contacted me and said he was emailing over the first draft. And when I looked at it, it was in rough form as a first draft, but I could see what he was looking to do. It wasn't to make fun or light of wrestling. It was to incorporate these wrestlers from iconic stages in their careers. So as we remember Roddy Piper from the early WrestleManias,
Right.
Jim Duggan in that same period, Shane Douglas from the ECW years, and taking all those characters and putting them in one vehicle that allows it to work over the span of generations of wrestling fans. And that's how I got my foot in the door with it. We started conversing and working with each other on it. And he had me, of course, handling the wrestling side. And so I contacted guys that, I looked up to, and guys that I'd worked with, and guys that I thought would be fantastic, and not going to bury under their diva shelf, rather than entering themselves into the movie as the wrestler that they had always been.
Now, I saw in another interview you had said that every wrestler is playing themselves. How much of that was automatically scripted, or was it just generalizations in the script?
Yeah, in the early drafts, it was scripted as, and this is, again, one of the things that I really like professionally about Cody Knotts. He didn't say, okay, here's exactly what I want Shane Douglas to say in this scene, and Roddy Piper, because he knew that he can only write in his voice.
Right.
So he wrote it, and the early drafts had the wrestlers' verbiage and dialogue in red, and that was signifying that this is the gist of what he wants them to say, but he wants them to say it on screen as the franchise Shane Douglas would say it, Roddy Piper, Hacksaw Jim Duggan, Kurt Angle, Matt Hardy, how they would say it. And so it's very fluid that way. And then as a wrestler and a budding actor, that was very refreshing to me because I can speak all day long in the franchise.
Right.
And so he would incorporate that in. And there were, even after he did those drafts and incorporated them in, on set, Roddy might come over and say, hey, I wouldn't speak like that, but how about if I say it like this? And he was always fine with it. So you're seeing these guys in not only the characters that they were, but in their voice. No, those lines were not written for them. That was given to them as just a general idea and comment, and then they transformed it into how they would say it.
Segueing into that a little bit, that's kind of the problem I've heard you say, and a lot of fans would say with most modern wrestling.
Absolutely. I mean, look, I'll preface with this. I would love to be 20 years old again, obviously.
Right.
That's not going to happen. I'd love to see this generation of kids who have amazing athleticism. The problem is they're put into a system where none of their creativity comes out. It's just what some writer wrote in the writer's room or what some agent tells them in the locker room. It's not them wrestling, bringing their skill and their style to the screen. So you're seeing, that's part of the reason why I believe that the product looks so sterile today. This wrestler reminds you of that one and that one and that one because it's just a cookie cutter. It's a cookie, press stamp, boom, boom, boom. And guys all talk the same, they wrestle the same, or shouldn't even say wrestle, they go out there and dance together because even the stuff that's being written for them as their action, only Shane Douglas knows how Shane Douglas would respond in the ring and do certain things. You might be able to write a scene that sort of mimics that, but the fans that have followed our careers will know Shane Douglas would never do a backflip off the top rope or whatever, because I never have. So that was, I think, one of the things that was very good about the movie, and like you said, one of the things that's down about the business today. I want to see these kids go out and learn the same way I did, and yeah, they'll screw up here and there, but they'll also, a year or two down the road, become a much better, more seasoned veteran as opposed to what they would have been.
Well, it's interesting to me because you used to have guys who would tour the Indies, go to Mexico, go to Canada, go to Europe, go to Japan, and they would learn different styles and different aspects of wrestling. Whereas here nowadays, you don't necessarily have that. You might have a few independent companies here and there, and then they end up in NXT in Florida. And I think a lot of NXT is good, but they're all learning the same style. No one's sticking out. They all feel the same, like you said, cookie cutter.
Yeah, and it's a shame, too, because I know, having worked with guys like Ricky Steamboat and Arn Anderson, Bill DeMott, I know how those guys work and I know what they taught me, and yet I'm not seeing any their stamp. I'm not seeing any Ricky Steamboat in the kids that are coming up from there, or any Bill DeMott, or any of Arn Anderson. It just seems like they're all coming up and there's just the same flavor over and over again. And like Bill Watts used to say, that when you sit down at Thanksgiving dinner, you don't want just a big pile of turkey. You want a little bit of everything.
Right.
And same in wrestling. The wrestling fans don't want to come and watch Shane Douglas wrestle in the first segment, the third segment, the fifth segment, the eighth segment, or characters that remind them of Shane Douglas. They want something different in each match, and then it works. And again, the business has grown so opposite of that for wrestling fans like us, I'd rather watch something else. I would love to see these kids, what they could do in the system that I came under.
Now, I've also heard you say you're working on another wrestling thing that you couldn't go into much detail. Is there any update on that?
Yeah, I can give you as much information as I can. First of all, through this, I've been getting contacts from people that are shooting other movies and doing other projects.
Right.
But there's also a major announcement that the Pro Wrestlers vs. Zombies producers, of which I'm one, will make a major announcement at WrestleCon next week for the New Orleans WrestleMania. And they've got big plans for it. So I'm excited to be involved with it. And to me, I always knew in the back of my head that wrestling fans, once they saw or heard of this project, Pro Wrestlers vs. Zombies, would eventually, if not later than sooner, plug into it and find out about it. And that's exactly what we're seeing. We just finished up the Horror Hound convention in Cincinnati the last 3 days. And every single fan that came up to the table was so happy to see they could finally get the movie. They've been hearing about it for a year, and they wanted to see it. And plus, they want to come by and see the personalities that are there that are in this movie. So I think there's definitely going to be longer legs to this thing, and the announcement at WrestleCon next week will, I think, fill a lot of that for the fans.
I'll be at WrestleCon with a booth for my show, so I might get to see you there if I have a minute to meet you.
Yeah, beautiful. That'd be great.
Yeah. There's a lot of crossover between horror fans and wrestling fans. Why do you think that is? You can only guess, but I grew up the exact same way. I grew up reading comic books, watching wrestling, playing sports, and loving science fiction and horror movies. So, especially a zombie movie, because I can remember my mom, when I was about 5 or 6 years old, took me to the drive-in theater to see Night of the Living Dead, and I've been hooked ever since. I grew up in Pittsburgh. We used to have a show on Saturday nights called Chiller Theater with Bill Cardille, who also was the announcer for studio wrestling at that time in Pittsburgh. And so it just all wrapped together, and I think the fans are the same way. Wrestling fans are very diligent and very loyal, and so are the people that watch horror movies and the people that read comic books. And I think when you twist that and mix it all together, you begin to realize that this horror fan is pretty close to a wrestling fan, which is pretty close to a comic book fan. It brings larger-than-life fantasy to the screen in wrestling and in horror and in comic books. And the people that are loyal to those genres, you go up to a comic book guy, and if they ask you a question about the Green Lantern, if you can't answer it, they know you're one of the outsiders. You're not like them. And so the same with wrestling fans and the same with horror fans, and I think it's like chocolate and peanut butter go together, so do those three things. They just work well together. You also ask the wrestling fan, they're going to go on a tangent for 30, 40 minutes about it, just like the comic book fan.
Yeah, you get into that. There's always, at least traditionally in wrestling, there's always been a morality play. The guy that takes the shortcut always comes up short. The good guy usually wins. Those type of morality plays that have worked from the time of the ancient Greeks and probably much earlier than that still works today, which surprises me, Matthew, that we can't get the big two companies to understand or see that. But thank God they didn't, because there'd be no room for movies like this or the new wrestling company that we're fixing to start up.
Now, that new company, is it Jarrett's new company, or is it something completely different?
Something completely different. From what I'm hearing from my contacts in the business, is that Jarrett's not so much, he's using the word network, but what it's going to be is more in line with what Vince is envisioning, an online network that he could then show old Memphis tapes, which Dad owns. Here he's negotiating with AAA to bring Lucha Libre, that style of Lucha Libre, to his network. And so it'll be an internet network, from what I'm hearing, that will showcase wrestling from around the country. This one we're starting to talk about, and pretty well into the discussion, is that it's going to be an old school wrestling company that brings all the best of the things that they remember of old school wrestling, not just the holds and the moves, but the intelligent storylines that don't insult your intelligence. And then with a little taste of shoot fighting and the snugness that ECW brought to the products, a lot of that thrown together. But when you sit down and watch it, the first slogan we have for the company is, "This is your daddy's wrestling."
That's good.
What your dad and grandfather grew up watching, and now you get the chance too.
Well, because there's a lot of, I know personally, a lot of lapsed fans that they necessarily don't hate the WWE or anything, but they much prefer a more serious take on pro wrestling. They enjoy the old Southern wrestling or, ECW style, but it's weird because the same people who love those things wouldn't check out a Ring of Honor.
Yeah, and who knows why. I mean, I think Ring of Honor, what I'm hearing from the fans is that it's been in business for 10 years and there's a lot they like about it, but then owned by a television company, Sinclair Broadcasting, the lights and the sound are usually bad, and the content is laid out in a poor way. I saw a segment several months ago that had Kevin Steen, who I think is a fantastic talent, had Kevin Steen do an interview, went to a break, came back from the break, and had Kevin Steen do 2 more interviews that you could tell were filmed at different times. So they must have had a big gap in time that they needed to fill, and decided the best way to do that, or the only way that footage they had, was to throw back-to-back Kevin Steen promos in, and that never works. Never works.
That's terrible. Why would you want to see 3 interviews of the same guy in a row?
That's exactly right. Bruno Sammartino taught that to me at Dominic's school 35 years ago. When I was a kid in the Pittsburgh Civic Arena, I used to watch, and I'd half watch the ring, but then I'd also have one eye looking back towards the entranceway, because you'd see Jumpin' Johnny DeFazio or Chief Jay Strongbow or Crazy Lou Grimm. You'd see them looking out the tunnel, but I never saw Bruno, and I asked him about that. I said, why did I never see you when I was a kid looking out that tunnel? And he said, always remember, they'll pay to see you once, they don't want to see you more than once. And so when you, again, take that old school adage and put it on plug it into the business today, how many segments when Hogan and Bischoff were in TNA showcased Hogan and Bischoff? 3, 4, 5 per episode. And they can't figure out, I can't imagine that they can't figure out what's wrong with their product. It's just in looking at it. The average person, not being a wrestling fan, can look at that and say, geez, I just saw this guy. I'm seeing him again. Now I just saw him twice and I'm seeing him again. So there's a lot missing from our business today, and it's all the things that we're going to try to bring back into this new company, which we'll release the name on very soon.
All right, that sounds great. Now, I want to ask you, I'm from New Orleans, and one of the things I was checking out last night on the WWE Network was November to Remember 1998, when you and the Triple Threat faced Van Dam, Sabu, and Taz at the UNO Lakefront Arena. What do I about that night? Yeah.
Oh, man, several things. Almost like it was yesterday. It's weird, Matthew, because when I was in ECW, I was an 11-year veteran in the business. But in very many ways, I was new to the business because I'd never been the heel and I was never the lead guy. And so it was really a learning curve for me. And then beyond that, and those first 11 years in the business felt like 11 years, if not 12. But the last 20 years in my career, it seems almost like a blink of an eye, like I've been in a coma and I've woken up and I'm here it is 20 years later. The UNO show that we had, I remember vividly, because I had Chris and Bam Bam with me, which, I was always marked for both their works, and them as human beings. They were great guys.
Yeah.
The building was extraordinarily hot that night. New Orleans can get hot and humid, and it was one of those nights. And in wrestling the match, at the time, all 3 of us had angles. Me with Taz, Candido with
Van Dam, Sabu.
No, Sabu, yeah. And then
Big Scott, Bam Bam, had a feud with Rob Van Dam. So it was easy for us to then plug into the match in a six-man way and say, okay, Bammer, you get in there with Rob, then get out. Then I'll get in there with Taz, we'll get out. And, so it was plugging the angles that were already in existence in the singles level into a six-man tag. And the overriding thing of the match I remember was, in television, especially, Dave, you've got a very tight window of time because there's other matches that have to come on and you can't take it long, etc. So we had, in my mind, one shot to get in there and make this. Me and Taz had one shot to make our segment of that match work. Same with Bam Bam and Sabu with Chris and Bammer. And Rob went in first. As action picked up, Rob Van Dam was the first to go into the ring with Bam Bam. And they were to do their little series, bump out of the ring, the next two in, they bump out, and then here we go, me and Taz in the center of the ring. And while that was going on, Rob had missed, he wanted to do a dive and he had missed it. So he set it right back up again, what you learn when you're a rookie in the business, not to do the same move over. He lined it up and started again and went back into the overall part of his segment, which instantly took the match long. And I remember afterwards just being so frustrated because I thought we had a chance to really do something special with those levels of talent in the match. And in my mind, I don't say the match sucked, but it didn't give the fans what we had envisioned it to give because suddenly the other two segments out of those three was cut short because of Rob going long. And I had to walk back. I couldn't go back in the dressing rooms. I was so upset and I was hot. And so I walked out of the hallway into the offices of the UNO building. And there was a lady in there working on her computer, and she looked at me like crazy, his guys in tights and boots. Do you mind if it was air-conditioned office? I said, do you mind if I lay on your floor for a bit? And I just went in there and laid down for about 45 minutes just to calm myself down because, again, I thought we had an opportunity to knock it out of the park, and we ended up with a double.
Oh, that's crazy. Now, when WWE relaunched ECW and did all that stuff, but they had the reunion shows, were you ever contacted about being part of those? And if,
yes.
Why didn't you do it?
Well, Tommy Dreamer had contacted me. When he called me, he said that he had just walked out of the meeting with Vince and they had planned on doing this, and that Vince requested that he call me first. And when I left there, Matthew, in 97, or late 96, early 97, I forget which one it was, I told myself and told the world I'll never go wrestle there again. I was treated so poorly there for money and the way I was utilized and everything else. So I thought, I'm out of that crazy place and I'm never going back. And there's been times over the years they have called the new ECW that was not ECW.
Right.
It was one of those things. Tommy called me every day in a row for 4 days, and I finally said, please tell Vince, I appreciate him keeping me in mind. I wish you all the best of luck. If you need something that I can help you with, let me know. But I'm not interested. And I explained to Tommy why. I will not go back and work for that man that treated me like that, because why wouldn't he treat me like that again? And they tried, and in hindsight, man, I'm thrilled that I stuck to my guns on that because there was something suspicious about it to me from the beginning anyway. And the reason is, when I worked there in 96, Vince and Jim Ross, every time I saw them at tapings or some kind of an event, would beat my ear asking me questions about ECW. But the noteworthy thing was I never heard Vince McMahon ever utilizing or speaking the letters ECW. He would always come up and say, hey, Shane, back when you were in the bingo hall company, back when you were in the minor leagues, back when you were in the bingo hall, back when you were in the small pond. He had all these backhanded euphemisms he used about ECW. And then, years later, here he is trying to do an ECW. I just had a suspicion in the back of my head and in my gut that he was going to do something to harm it, not to make it better. And he could have very easily, at any time, spun ECW off. Storyline being Paul Heyman's family came up with money to buy it back, whatever. But he had Paul Heyman under contract. He had 9/10 of the ECW talent under contract at that time. Could have very easily, seamlessly spun ECW off into its own entity and been the financial backer of it and made a lot more money. When he started airing the new ECW, I knew I was right because it was so not ECW. Let's face it, our fans have pretty high expectations of what they remember about ECW. Sometimes greater expectations than were reality. And the one thing you couldn't do was to go in there and give them ECW Light or ECW Junior. It had to be ECW on steroids or it wouldn't work. And nothing against any of the guys.
But the WWE guys that he plugged into that new ECW were guys that would have been the last wrestlers on the planet you saw in ECW. So I've never heard any other reason. I've never really put much thought into it or cared. But my looking at the situation is that if you remember, every time people still do it, when they see something in the ring that looks snug or hard or hardcore, they chant ECW. They still remember. And that product was so much unlike ECW that I think his intent, because Vince is no idiot,
right.
But they put on that un-ECW product and color ECW, I think was his attempt to sanitize an audience, any audience, of wanting to chant that. Sound is a very difficult thing to cut out on post-production, because if you're visually watching the screen and you see thousands of fans in the audience pumping their fist 3 times, and then you hear just one long roar, you know that that's fake sound.
Well, just watch any episode of SmackDown, and you can tell that.
Yeah, and so that it's difficult to sanitize that off, and I think the only way you could do it is in his mind, let's put out such a god-awful ECW that those fans will never want to chant it again. It was a good attempt, but what he failed to understand was our fans, like us, for them, would walk to the ends of the earth. They love and remember and respect ECW. So you still hear people talking about it today. They still get the chance today. And Vince's attempt, if that was his attempt to sanitize it, didn't work.
Towards the end of their version of ECW, they got better in terms of quality of wrestling, superstars that were on it, but it wasn't ECW. They should have never called it that. And one thing I'll remember was they went to the Hammerstein Ballroom in the early days of it, and they main evented it with Big Show versus Batista. Nobody's buying that shit there.
No, nobody's going to watch that, and it's again. But while at the same time he was doing this, he was also setting up the Florida pool. So if you have an entity already that you own and in your stable that can, one thing that Paul Heyman has proven time and again he's exemplary at is producing young stars, new characters and young stars. So why not just have him do it instead? I think it just shows you a little peek inside Vince's psyche, inside his mindset, that he didn't create it. So there's no way in the world he's going to push it and make it bigger, which I think is just a Freudian psychoses that he has, because again, I don't care what you call whatever product. If the money goes right directly back into my bank account,
right?
Oh, it tiddlywinks if you want. But he had the opportunity, and Vince has now shown many, many times over his career. He's, on one hand, a phenomenal businessman and made a lot of money, but look at where he's taken wrestling, and he's suffering more from the lack of competition now than anybody. And he's got his attention turned to other things now instead of putting on that hip, cool product. Vince Russo himself told me that he directly copied from ECW to come up with the attitude. And it was obvious. You could see it in the way that they did it. But now they've moved so far beyond that and past that. It's been years since Vince McMahon has created a new bankable star. TNA's never produced one bankable star. And, like Bill Watts used to say, it's black hat, white hat. That's wrestling. We're not curing cancer and we're not splitting the atom. So just get back to that tried and true formula, and you might see some of those 48 million fans who have departed from the wrestling business. You might see some of them come back.
Why do you think TNA hasn't made a bankable star? Is it the lack of marketing? Or what is it?
That's certainly not the reason. To date, as of about 7 or 8 months ago, Panda Energy, directly or indirectly, has dumped over $400 million into TNA wrestling. The problem is vision. Because to me, as a veteran in this business, and as somebody that worked there for 5 years, 5.5 years, they had an amazing talent stable. A much better locker room than Vince had at the time. But I'll use two as examples for you. One being Bobby Roode. When I left there in 2007, Bobby Roode was then poised and ready to become the next big thing in wrestling. And they've done very little with him since. Even putting the title on him was just a transition title. But when we turned him and pulled him away from Team Canada, the powers that be in TNA at that time, Dixie and Russo and Jarrett, suddenly, instead of pushing him, broke him off of Team Canada to have him wrestle with guys like Eric Young, who's a great guy,
and a great talent, but also made him go out and wrestle Bobby Roode in a chicken suit and beat him. You know, those are the kind of things that the fans see right through, and they know that subliminally you're not giving Bobby the push. So they'll not invest their time in that guy until they see the legitimate push from the company. And we've seen this time and again from him. How many times have you seen non-starts with Dolph Ziggler, who I think is a hell of a hand? They push him for a week or two, then you don't see him for a month. Then he gets beat for a couple of weeks, and they push him again, and then you don't see him again. And last year at the Royal Rumble, he's in the last 5. Of the last 5 left over, Jericho, Sheamus, the Bill Goldberg, Ryback, Ziggler, and Sheamus, Chris Jericho, and John Cena.
Right.
And the only person that made sense out of those final 5 to go over was Dolph Ziggler. He was the one guy that had yet to be made and be built into something. Instead, they put on Cena that needed no push whatsoever. The win did nothing at all to elevate him. So you got to watch this, and as a wrestler, you got to think, what in God's name are they doing? You know, the blind can see through this, and yet they seem not to be able to understand or recognize it. It's frustrating and flustering to me at the same time because it just doesn't. Product is just not clicking on any cylinder.
And as a fan, it's underwhelming because you see they're going with their story no matter what, no matter how predictable, and it's frustrating. It really is.
It is. You know, to the fans, it must be because it's frustrating to us on the inside of the business. Wrestling fans and the wrestlers have a very tight relationship. If the wrestlers are loving it, then you can pretty much guess that the fans are. And if the fans aren't like me, you can pretty much guess that the wrestlers aren't either. And there are all these different directions that they're trying and refusing to try wrestling. The one that gets me really is TNA, because the day that I met Dixie Carter, from that day forward, she was always breaking questions with me. Well, why this? And do you think this is going to work? And what do you think about that? And I told her at that time to, in no way, shape, or form, try to engage Vince McMahon. Don't try to be WWF 2 or whatever, or Junior. Be the new TNA. I made the mistake of invoking ECW.
Right.
Like ECW did. We went for the 18 to 49 male demographic, and we owned them. And her response to me was, why would we want to copy ECW? After all, they failed. And literally, as she was saying that, we were in the green room. On the monitor, her monitor from the studio right across the way from our green room, their audience, TNA's audience, was chanting ECW. I don't know what happened in the ring, but it was very loud and noticeable. And I turned around. I didn't answer with words. I answered her by turning around, looking at the monitor, and looking back at her and wondering if she's getting the irony of this. Yeah, we failed. ECW failed on a business level, but the fans today still speak highly of it, and they'll still chant it when they see something. I don't believe in 10 or 12 years you'll hear fans chanting TNA.
If TNA still exists in 10 or 12 years, it seems that every now and then internet reports are like, it's dying, but it never goes away.
Well, it's because of the deep pockets they have. Keep in mind, Panda Energy is the company that is building, I don't know if you're familiar or not, in China they're building a dam that's 6 times larger than the Hoover Dam.
Jeez.
It's a $45 billion project. Those type of projects always have overruns. It'll probably end up a $55 or $60 billion project. And Panda Energy is overseeing that. So they've got money. That's one issue they don't have. They have the talent. They have Spike Network, which I think traditionally would be the greatest outlet for professional wrestling. It's soap opera and sports for men. That's a men's network. But the phrase I've been using is TNA's dead, they just haven't hit the floor yet. And the only reason they're still standing upright is because of the money. I've got to believe that Bob Carter and the CFO of Panda Energy are going to be asking some very serious questions as to whether they want to continue this investment or not, because they're losing it through the nose, through the eyes, through the ears, and the backside. They're hemorrhaging money.
That's what I always tell a friend of mine who says it's doom and gloom for TNA every 2 weeks. I tell him, as long as they're on Spike TV and Panda Energy's pumping in money to them, they're going to be in existence. They might not make money, but they'll be around.
Right. They wouldn't have lasted for 6 months if they were contingent on the money they brought in. They would have never lasted the first 6. But because of those deep pockets, they do still exist. And I got to believe, like I said a second ago, that sooner or later, with the absolute zero return on any of that investment, that somebody in that company, Bob Carter, the head CFO, their counsel, somebody's going to tell them to pull the plug.
And what I'm hearing is the only reason they're continuing on right now is they've let some of the bigger money guys like AJ Styles and guys like that go, and they're going with nightlies because they figure if they can slow down the hemorrhaging, they might be able to get somebody interested in buying it. They've already had, that I know of, 5 different entities turn them down, including Vince McMahon. So, they're done. You can stick a fork in them, and they 10 years from now, they'll probably be professors in economic schools using TNA as a microcosm for their class lectures as to what not to do in business.
It's sad that TNA didn't take off the way it should have been, but people have been saying, since it was weekly pay-per-views when Jarrett first started it, that it wouldn't last 3 months.
Yeah, and it did, and the reason it did last beyond that was that we did have some influx of money with the pay-per-views that had low buy rates, but it gave you some grease each week. And then when Panda came in, they had almost unlimited funds. And so that's the only reason, again, if they had, not to keep piping back to ECW, but we had Todd Carter behind us, who was a millionaire, but a millionaire on paper, tied up in assets and business and everything else. He didn't have just a vault of money that he could write out to us.
Right.
And we did it the right way. We established our product with our audience. We never tried to swerve them or take advantage of them. These are basic, not wrestling adages. These are basic business adages. If you're running a hot dog stand in your town, you give your customers the products that they want, and you don't make them feel like idiots for buying your product at the window. But this is what TNA has done and tried to find some way of turning that into a positive, and I don't think there is one to that.
Now, I got this on a completely different note. Do you ever feel like, were you the guy who said no to anything when you were asked to do it in the wrestling business? Because there was something I stumbled across YouTube the other day, the Viagra on a pole match. How did you agree to that?
What did I agree to?
Oh, the Viagra on a pole match from in WCW?
Yeah.
How did you agree to that? You just were game for it, or you said no, or you fought it?
I wasn't game for it. At that stage, whenever I left ECW, I was owed so much money from ECW, a ton of money. And that wasn't money that was just owed to me. It was money that I had spent, over half of it was money that I had spent on promoting shows here in Pittsburgh for airfares and radio and television and newspaper and whatever else. And when I got the contract offer from WCW, that was a very handsome contract offer. I didn't have any leverage to demand any more money because I'd already been to New York and wasn't going back. So I was very happy to have gotten the contract I did, but certainly not a happy camper as far as the product went. And so the way I sort of justified it to myself was, I'm just going to go and do whatever the hell they want me to do, and I don't care if they want to win, lose, act like an idiot. I'll just keep that paycheck coming, because the loyal franchise that always cared about the other side of the business and the product and the fans and the company had usually been on the short end of the stick. And I had to make up the difference of what Paul had owed me from ECW just to get my household back to solid. And I wasn't going to rock the boat down there, because they had a habit of just, once you did that, either not utilizing you or just cutting you out of the picture. And my thought at the time was, constantly with WCW, there had been so much turnover at that level and management that, as stupid as this stuff is today, they're doing the Viagra match and, the can't get it up and all that kind of stuff. The stupid comments that they had with all the different segments and whatnot. I figured, well, this is going to be a window. We'll endure this garbage for 3-4 months, and then they'll end up firing this guy, and they'll bring somebody else in. And that was my thought. And then when the new person comes in, we'll be able to really focus again back on the product. That never happened. Vince ended up buying it, and I certainly wasn't going back to work for Vince.
What is it that you don't want to work for Vince? Is it just that you've been disrespected by him, or I don't know the story around that?
Well, a little bit of everything. When I left ECW to go up there in '96. It wasn't an easy departure for me, because I was one of the architects from the ground floor. But when the money had gotten well into the 6 figures of money that I was owed, I couldn't keep going on the promise from Paul. And, I knew that there was a window of opportunity and that I could make money. The pays were horrible, way less than I would have made even wrestling, independent wrestling at the time. And I was working on a semi-main event every night for 28 days out of the month, and traveling all over God's green earth. And that was the first thing. The second thing was watching how Vince allowed a very small, finite, select few run roughshod over the dressing room, disrespect the dressing room, and the fans in the company. Because it wasn't just me that was focused on by the Clique. It was me. It was Dustin. It was multiple people, and it brought his company to a very bad place. Because if you recall, after the Attitude stuff came and went through, they went into the doldrums for a while before they sort of stabilized it. The wrestlers, the dressing room as a group was very unhappy there as they sat back. And it's very difficult when you've been on the road for 30 days of the last 30 or 31, and you're running yourself all over God's green earth and trying to get lifting in and working out and getting to the airport on time and doing all these things that wrestling entails. It's a very physically demanding job and time-consuming. Then you see guys that, like Kevin Nash and Scott Hall and Shawn Michaels and Hunter and John Waltman flying around places first class while you're shoved in the middle seat of the back of the plane. You've got to go get a rental car, and they've got a limousine picking them up outside. Those types of things. For me, it was just the over and under. It was everything. Being treated like that, not given the opportunity to go out and really showcase your wares. And again, so blatantly watching the Triple Threat, go out and, just protect themselves and everybody, screw everybody else in the company. I knew that there was no good outcome to that. That sooner or later, the bottom's going to fall out, and the fans. Again, we said earlier in the interview, the fans don't want to sit there and watch Shane Douglas in 5 or 6 segments, nor do they want to watch Shawn Michaels or anybody. They want to see, each person in each match change. And that's what it was pretty much getting down to up there. And then when I had been there for maybe 5 or 6 weeks, one of the things, I'm not patting myself on the back, but I've been recognized by fans and by my peers as being one of the better promo guys in the business. And had worked very hard at that through the early stages of ECW, and before that with WCW and NWA. I knew that the characters that would get over in my generation would be the one thing that most of them were weak at, the promos. And when we started doing those vignettes on Vince's program, of me giving all the silly comments and grades, I knew at that point that the one day we'd gone, it was a Sunday, we were at the studio, the WWE studio, and doing vignette after vignette after vignette, all morning, all afternoon. And a costume change between each one, and learning the new lines, and just going through this whole round-robin thing over and over again, like Groundhog Day. And Vince wanted me to speak in the monotone voice, so he wanted me to talk like this, with no voice inflection, quiet, sure, calm, confident. And I said to him, Vince, the reason he told me that he wanted me to do that was that he had a teacher in 8th grade that used to talk like that, and it bored him to tears. I said, well, Vince, the difference is when you were in 8th grade, you had to sit there and listen to it. You couldn't get up and change the channel or walk out of the room.
Right.
Fans today are surfers. So as soon as they see that segment they know is going to be boring, they know they got 90 seconds or 2 minutes to go watch something else, and they'll come back. If you want this character to work, let me do that last one. In different verbiage, but the same verbiage but different delivery. And I did the 6th one that we had done. I went back and shot it a second time using the voice inflection and the franchise laugh, and just a much more animated. As I finished up, he got called out of the room on a phone call. In the room still with me, and while I shot those vignettes all day long were the makeup people and the hair girls and the lighting guys and the sound guys and the camera guys, Michael Hayes, Stan Lane, I think Jim Ross. The room was full of people. So after I finished it, he got called out. I pulled the room. I said, what did everybody think? Tell me your honest opinion. And every single person in that room, including Jim Ross and Michael Hayes and Stan Lane, all the lighting, sound, camera guys, the makeup girls, the costume girls, everybody said, man, that last one was so much more fun to watch. That was interesting. It was compelling. So Vince comes back in about 10, 15 minutes later after I pulled this audience. He's got a cup of coffee, he's got his glasses down on the tip of his nose, and he leans against the table or the desk, whatever it was, and he said, so what'd you think, Vince? He said, well, and he does this long look staring away like he's pondering the secrets of the universe. He says, I can see what you were trying to do, and I liked it, but I think I liked my way better. What's everybody else think? And every single person in that room that had told me 10 minutes before my way was way better But we agree with you, Vince. That's what we just got done telling him. And I knew at that point it was time to get out of there because no business needs the boss surrounded by yes men. It helps sometimes, but there's also times that the boss man has to be told some bad information or something that angers him a bit, so he takes a wider look, a wider view of the situation. And Vince hasn't done that traditionally, and we've all heard, those of us that have worked for him know it, and the ones from the outside have heard it, that Vince does things his way and only his way, and if it's not done his way, he takes his ball and goes home. Well, I saw that in practice today, that vignettes, and I knew it was at that time, not even 2 months into my tenure there, that it was time to get the hell out of there.
Is there anyone that ever tells him no?
Not that I'm aware of. At least that lived to tell the tale.
We gotta think about this. It's interesting, some of the stuff that he puts on TV, and you're like, why the hell did that get through?
Yeah. And the other part of that is, obviously I don't have a direct line to Vince, and
Right.
I wouldn't answer it anyway. But in watching the Royal Rumble last year, I could see all those stamps of what was wrong with the product. There were the main event between Punk and Orton had a very lackluster finish at the WrestleMania, I think the year before. It was just losing all the types of things that we were always taught to incorporate into the product. They were sanitized of it. The whole overarching thing with Vince perplexes me because you have a guy who's become a multi-time billionaire from professional wrestling, and yet doesn't allow his announcers to call it wrestling, his talent wrestlers. It's not a wrestling move. He had his opportunity to change the name of the company way back when, decade, 12 years ago, and he changed it to World Wrestling Entertainment,
Right.
World Sports Entertainment Federation or whatever, WWE. Now, by thinking if he did that because he knows wrestling still, at that time especially, still drew fans, but why would he not allow his announcers to call them wrestlers or a wrestling product or a wrestling ring? It's bizarre to me. There's something more Freudian at work in his head, and God only knows what that is.
I've heard instances that people say that he doesn't like wrestling, but you have to, in some respect, think he does because that's what he's made his money on. He might not like technical wrestling all the time or whatever, but he's got to like it somewhat.
Well, I think it's what I call it a Freudian thing.
Yeah.
There's certainly something more Oedipal going on because, again, if picking up dog crap made me a billionaire, I would be on this interview all day long with you singing the praises of picking up dog poop.
Right.
It made me a billionaire. Wrestling has made him a multi-time billionaire, but he seems to be disinterested or has some vernacular in his choice of words of the way he talks about it. And I think on one hand, part of him thinks he's creating a new genre, rewriting history and all of that. But the difference is the wrestling style of old school wrestling had endured for all intents and purposes well over 100 years, as was, and well over two millennia, because this is pretty close to what the ancient Greeks and the Romans did. Do you really believe that they wrestled into the death and they'd been out of wrestlers in a week? They wrestled to the death and then went to the next town 20 miles away, which might as well have been on the moon, without cars. Nobody came to that. And guess who wrestled again tomorrow night? The guy that got killed last night. It's the same type of thing. And, again, who knows what goes on in Vince's head. You said you can't argue some success, the fact that he's been fairly successful at it, but he's got himself painted into a pretty tight corner with the lack of competition, and I can't even begin to imagine why he's sanitizing the word wrestling out of his program. If I started a new sport, aired on TV tomorrow, my guys have shoulder pads and helmets and throwing a pigskin around. You pretty much know, I can call it tiddlywinks if you want, but you know that that's professional football.
Right.
And, so I just think it's sort of an odd place to be right now. The industry itself is in a state of flux. God knows how much longer TNA will even be breathing air. Vince has got himself sidetracked with this new network thing and the way that whole thing blew up in the States when he tried to blackmail or, squeeze the companies. And there's talk of new companies starting, and so I don't think 10 years from now there'll be much more discussion on it. It's either going to be brought back to its former grandeur and glory with bringing professional wrestling back, or I believe going the way of roller derby. I don't think the fans will keep tuning in for this cartoon type stuff. My kids are, and I'll finish with this. My kids are 7 and 12 years old. When I was 7 and 12, I was hook, line, and sinker, super glued to professional wrestling. I loved it from the time I was 4, and I still love professional wrestling. But my kids at 7 and 12 years old, respectively, have already outgrown it. And I couldn't figure out why, and then I started thinking about it, and I'd watch them. They would turn the TV on to Nitro, or, I'm sorry, not Nitro, TNA's Thursday Impact show,
right.
And Vince's. They'll watch it for 5, maybe 10 minutes, and then they get bored, and they get up and walk out of the room and go do other things. But about a month ago, I tried an experiment. I put in Shane Douglas versus Bam Bam Bigelow from November to November 1997, and I turned the sound way down. And the boys kept, I was doing paperwork in my living room, and the boys went by the TV 4 or 5 times, and my youngest son stopped and looked at it, and he turned to me and he went, "Dad, that's you." I said, "Yeah." And so he started watching. 2 seconds later, he calls his brother. Within a minute, they're both on the floor in front of the TV with their fists up under their chin, glued to the TV. They didn't get up and go find their music or their girls or their guitars, glued to the wrestling again. And then I put in Sabu versus Terry Funk Barbar. They were glued to that. Then I put in an old WCW tape that came, like, from towards the end, and they watched it for about 30 seconds and got up and walked out. Those kids that have grown up with playing with the Vince McMahon dolls, the WWE dolls, and the action figures and the rings, and they had the sheets and the pillowcases, those kids have now outgrown that cartoon style, and they want something that reminds them of what they want something that reminds them of what they grew up watching, but they want it more real, more reality, snugger, tighter. And, there's millions of those kids out there. So the target audience for this new company isn't just the 18 to 49 male that used to love ECW. It's for them and for those kids that, like mine, have outgrown the cartoon WWE.
Now, I want to ask you about a guy that seems to have some beef with you, if you're cool with that.
Sure.
I'm in New Orleans, as I've said before. The Southern Stomper, Luke Hawx. Where's his problems with you come from? Because anyone who's out there can go to the Extreme Rising YouTube page and see Luke shoot on you. I know Luke, he's a pretty good guy from my dealings with him. Where's it come from? Where's this all originate from?
I think, I have no idea. My thinking is that he saw Shane Douglas take the page and tear it out of the book and rewrite it, and he thinks he's going to try to do the same. The problem with it is this: A, it's been done. B, right. Mine was reality-based. I had a legitimate beef with Ric Flair, and so did my generation. But most importantly, I had already drawn money at that point in my career, lots of it. Luke has been in the business for, I think, about 13 years. Has never drawn a dime for any company. He's had multiple tryouts with WWE, TNA, Ring of Honor, and they've all passed on. He had 4 with WWE, 4 with TNA, and 3 with Ring of Honor. They've all turned him down. The last time he was in WWE, as he's standing on the apron, he's telling all the other tryouts that are listening to him that he's a bona fide star, and WWE would be idiots not to hire him. Well, guess who was sitting 10 feet behind him? Hunter Hearst Helmsley. So Hunter was only too eager to kick that kid in his ass and tell him to get the hell out. That's a cancer in the dressing room. If it's a legitimate beef, then your peers around you know, like mine did, that the beef with Flair was legitimate, that it was real. 2 things. He keeps on saying, I've done something to his career. 2 things to that. Well, I was booker in XPW for about a year and a half, 2 years. That kid, before he got on the steroids and beefed up and looks good, was about 125 pounds soaking wet. Moved much better than he can now. But he was on the roster. When I'm the booker, if you're on the roster, that means I've given you a job. Because if XPW had him on the roster and I didn't want him there, he'd have been fired. Same thing with Extreme Rising. So, to go out, I saw one time, several months ago, he posted something on my Facebook page. Now, you're playing the Shane Douglas fans when you're at the franchise Shane Douglas Facebook page.
Right.
Posted something really derogatory, and after 2 weeks, it was posted 2 weeks prior to when I saw it, there were exactly 0 responses. None. Which means nobody gives a shit. Nobody cares. So you ask him what the beef with me is, because I could at this point really not. It doesn't matter to me.
Right.
The companies that I'm running and working in, and there's a new one coming that we're going to make an announcement on very soon. Luke Hawx will not be part of it because I don't need a kid like that in my dressing room. Even to play the old school tricks on him, there's tons of them. But let me tell you what Bill Watts would have done with him or me at that time, stage of my career, if I had never drawn money. If I'd have started talking like that in the dressing room, Bill Watts wouldn't have fired me. He'd have put me in the room with Dick Slater later that night and told Dick that if he didn't knock the teeth out of my face, he was fired. So guess what Dick would do that night? That's how the company business used to be run, and I think it's not just the product, some of that needs to be brought back. When you're working for a company, the last thing in the world you do, regardless of your differences with the management, you go out publicly and slam the company that pays you and works with you. He's also done that. So for a kid that's been in the business for 13 years, he's certainly not learned the lessons of the business, and again, hasn't drawn money and had multiple tryouts with the other companies. Maybe they're seeing in him the same thing I see in him, a big mouth with no substance. When we had him involved in the main event in Pittsburgh, November before last, he came out and ruined the main event, almost crippled, could have killed Matt Hardy because they pushed him off before he was set. Those are things that I wouldn't expect a 13-year veteran to do. And if you're doing that, then you've certainly not learned the lessons of what you should, because you wouldn't want somebody pushing you off that top rung if you weren't set. And, the sad part of it is the kid has some skills. If he get his head out of his ass and start to learn his craft, instead of trying to take a page out of somebody else's book from 20 years ago that worked then because of legitimacy, not going to work this time because of no legitimacy. So he said to me one time at one of the Extreme Rising shows that what he was being paid was ridiculous. He could make more than that working at his shows in New Orleans. My response to him was, then you're an idiot for being here. But if you can make more money working for somebody else right in your backyard, then you're a mark for coming here, not a wrestler. I don't need marks in my dressing room.
He runs a local promotion here, and it takes forever between shows. It's something like 3 months between shows, and I've never ran a wrestling show. I don't know what it involves, but I gotta believe at some point it's easier to be like, okay, we're gonna be booked at this venue or whatever on this date, and the venue will be like, oh, you have 3 dates all in a row or whatever. It's
yeah. If you're successful at it and you know how to do it, then start your own company. There's nothing limiting him from doing that. If he's running once every 3, anybody can run 4 shows a year and have experience in this business and make money doing it. The question is when you can start to do it weekly or multiple times per month and start bringing grease into the company, then that's how the business operates. It doesn't operate on because quite frankly, nobody gives a damn about Troy Martin's opinions.
Right.
The franchise's opinions they care about because the franchise has been in the business for 35 years. My worry for Luke is at this point is that he's got a reputation, not a good one, that he's going to limit his own possibilities at the exactly wrong time of his career. Do you think Hunter's going to bring him back up for a tryout, or if he does, he's going to give him a job after he heard him say that? And probably, I don't know, I didn't hear what happened at the TNA and Ring of Honors, but probably something similar, and those companies won't deal with him. Right now, barring him or somebody else starting up a new company, he's made himself the glorified king of the indies. That's not a title that I endeavored to. I want to leave my mark on the wrestling business, and I've done that in the ring, and now trying to do it behind the scenes. This company that we're going to start up here very shortly has huge financial backing behind it, and it also has, it's going to bring stuff that's so revolutionary to the industry that it's going to force the Vince McMahon to change along with it or get out of the way. We're going to be offering health insurance, pension plans, 401ks, and revenue sharing to the wrestlers. So Luke would be, to find out what should be the real target of your shoot promos, if that's what you're calling them, and figure out a way to make that company see value in you, not turn the companies off, like he did with Ring of Honor, TNA, and WWE. And would have been gone from Ring of Honor had he not had 3 votes on the committee. The 2 votes that dissented on keeping him in the company were the 2 guys with the wrestling experience. So it's clearly not that we have a bone to pick with Luke Hawx, because I can give a rat's ass what Luke Hawx thinks about me or anything else in the business. If he can put asses in the seats, and he's there, going to make money with it. When another time he came to me. Well, I didn't tell it to me. He told it to one of my partners that we were putting the belt on, that we were idiots because everybody that was out there in these stands were there to see him. That's delusional because I didn't hear one person, one complaint of saying that he wasn't there in a few shows that we didn't have him at. And that night that we put the belt on Stevie at 1 o'clock in the morning, that the show had run very long. At 1 o'clock in the morning, an audience I would think be blown up and tired, in unison stood up and chanted, Stevie, Stevie, Stevie. And I looked at him and I said, well, at least a few people didn't expect to see you champion tonight. It's just, and it's a shame. Like I said, because the kid has some basic skills. And here's another little tidbit for you that you can tell would clearly endear him to the wrestling locker room. He went into the dressing room at the first Extreme Rising show in April of 2012, and pulled out his SAG card and said, any of you losers in here have one of these? I have one of these. That's what proves I'm better than you. Now, at that point, if I was working with him, I'd make damn sure I wasn't in the right place I was supposed to be when he was getting ready to do something, and then making fun of him afterwards. I've seen the things that he's in. The latest Homefront, he's a shadow in the background. He only got a SAG card. There's millions of people that have SAG cards. 99% of them starve. And their dues are what takes care of the Brad Pitts and the George Clooney's and the big stars. Bam Bam Bigelow had a SAG card for that one Trident commercial that he did was national. So the SAG card is not a delineator of your success. It's something you can use to build on. But even in that endeavor, I don't see it so much working. He's been doing those for 5 or 6 years now. I've not seen him showcased in anything. And again, has the skills to do it. But that attitude that permeates through, when I would go and work with people outside the business, I didn't take Shane Douglas, the character, with me.
Right.
That guy's pretty much a turnoff. And these are things that I've told Luke all of them in meetings with him. And, he still goes out and does and says those things. Well, the final thing I'm going to say about him is when he draws near the money that I've drawn in the business, when he's given work to as many guys as I've given work to in this business, when he starts a major company with huge pockets behind it and changes the industry not once but twice, then he can maybe argue some bragging rights. And for whatever thing is in his head, maybe he can make that legitimate. He's done none of the above. And won't as long as he has an attitude like that.
The first time I realized he was Altar Boy Luke from XPW, I was like, holy shit, that's the same guy?
Yeah, amazing transition. And I'll tell you this, from knowing from multiple people in the business, when look at Benoit, look at Eddie Guerrero, look at a lot of those guys, Chris Champion. The guys that take those, to maintain that, one thing about steroids when you use them is you have to keep using them, or you lose the size very quickly. Steroids were not developed as a bodybuilding tool. They were developed to put weight on people after the Holocaust, for the Holocaust survivors. And when used properly, are very efficacious and fairly safe. When over-abused, it makes your muscles grow. Well, for those the uninitiated, your heart's a muscle. When you enlarge your heart, it becomes sluggish and slow, and ends up having to, if you keep going, end up having to have either a massive heart attack or a heart transplant. So if that's the kind of stuff that Luke is shooting for, then you're on the right track, kid. And the funny part about that is, in the industry in the time that he's been in it, that kid, Altar Boy Luke, would have been a fairly significant draw in the sense that the wrestling business, unlike when I was a kid in the business, Land of the Giants, today it's very common to see 130, 40, 50, 60, 70-pound kids. So, no need for it. He's building the engine in the car without having a garage to park it in.
It's interesting because he could have probably taken off in a cruiserweight style division, and now he's kind of like, I want to compare him to Mike Modest, where he's too big to be a power wrestler, but too small to be too small to be a power wrestler and too big to be a cruiserweight.
Exactly right. And so you couple that together with
with his attitude. And those things are the things that turn people off. It's not a coincidence that all those other places have passed on him as well. And it's not often you get that kind of input from a 35-year veteran in the business, let alone one that you're trying to slam publicly and the public doesn't seem to care about. There's a reason that you sit where you do sit in the business. I was very fortunate that as somebody who had a big mouth in the business, that a company like ECW started up when it did, because I wouldn't have gone back to work for Vince at that stage, and WCW probably wouldn't have wanted me because of the things I was saying about Flair and whatever else. Thank God for ECW. But the one thing I didn't do when ECW started, Matthew, was I didn't go out, and Paul Heyman and I had very, very significant personal differences. Very significant. And I think that manifested itself in the program. When you saw the start of the show, you got barely a glimpse of Shane Douglas. But multiple times you see Tommy and Francine and Taz and Sandman. When the music discs came out, the Champions music was on neither one. So, you can see the differences in those ways that Paul and I had. But the difference was that Paul would look at me and realize that, differences aside, I was going to put asses in those seats. The fans knew me and they were drawn to me as a heel or as a babyface. When the other companies pass on you multiple times, if I were in his shoes, I would have already, after the first round of turndowns, I would have gone back to the drawing board and thought, what am I doing wrong? Taking a step back and looked at where I've been and what I've done. And, I don't care. It's not wrestling. If you come to work for me at McDonald's, if I'm a manager at McDonald's and you come to work for me and you're telling all the fry cooks in the back that I'm an idiot if I don't hire you, if you're the best fry cook ever, you're not going to get that job either. There's things that hiring companies want to see and things they don't want to see in somebody. And it's a shame, like I said, because the kid could have been something in the business. And I hear that he's too far past his prime now to catch that hold unless he changes immediately and throws himself on the sword, because the business does like, a humble talent. And, we'll see.
Right. There's that fine line between being cocky and being confident.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. The companies all want the confidence because they can steer that.
Right.
The cockiness is something you can't shake out of somebody. So, it's an interesting question. It's an interesting sidebar because, there are a lot of people like that in the business. Sadly, right now, there's too many of them. If I've got my choice of starting up the company, I've got to hire 30 to 35 wrestlers to launch it. I've seen hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of young guys that have the things that I want and not the detriments that I don't.
Right.
So if I'm going to hire somebody, I'm going to hire one of those guys that's going to be an asset in my dressing room and not an asshole in my dressing room.
What do you think of the guys who take it to social media and complain about their spots, whether in a big company or a small company? Because I find that kind of annoying as a fan, and I see other internet fans say, oh, he's dead on, blah, 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 they should push this guy to the moon or whatever. I think just shut up, and if you're good enough, ultimately, damn it, you're going to prove it.
Yeah. It's, and realize that somebody that was a big mouth through his career.
Oh, right.
I didn't have the social medias at the time. Because I probably would have ended up putting my foot in my mouth more times than I did. At the time that we did it, it was, again, every situation is different. I don't care if it's the same parameters. A wrestler trying to find a job in a wrestling company. It's all contingent to the time and place the business sits. At the time that ECW started, and I was running my mouth, it was never about the company. It was always about what was wrong with the other companies and what we were doing right. And there was plenty we were doing wrong. I didn't talk so much about those. Nobody wanted to hear those, especially the management. But, the social medias, like my publicist taught me a long time ago, and she passed away last year, was one of a very, very smart girl. She told me then when we started the Facebook page and now with the same thing with Twitter, when you're doing those things, you got to be very careful on the things you post online. You know how many doctors, lawyers, teachers, professors, clergy, military guys have been fired from their jobs for the stupid things they say on so that they think they're saying it in just a room with a few other people.
Right.
But you're saying it in a room with thousands of people, millions of people, and that's going to become public knowledge and public fodder. You know,
right.
My publicist told me a long time ago, only go public with the things you want the public to know. Never, ever speak about your private life. There's no reason for. And so if I was a young kid in the business today, and I knew that adage and that belief, I would be very careful. I mean, let's face it, social media is a very good tool to have if you're trying to get information out about an upcoming event or where you're wrestling this weekend, so fans can come see you. But it's another when you start going public and slamming the company that you work for. From their standpoint, look at it from their standpoint. They're the company that's putting food on your table, and you're out there slamming them to the public. It's never a good thing in any industry.
Well, you could have been paired with the Ding Dongs gimmick, so things could always be worse.
Well, that one. Yes, that's what I told Johnny. I said, always look at the bright side. We could have been a ding dong, you know.
Yeah, because that's something that was. How did some of those gimmicks? It's just fascinating to me that some of those gimmicks that are like, yeah, we're gonna think this isn't a good idea. No, they're not.
Yeah, well, it's a Dean character. The way that character was pitched to me was that Vince was getting upset because everybody on his crew, all of them, were making some very amateurish and silly mistakes in the ring. For instance, Bret Hart at the time he wasn't grapevining the leg on false finishes, only on the finish.
Right.
And so even if fans weren't picking up exactly what he was doing wrong, they knew something looked different. Some of the guys, when they were in the corner getting punched in the stomach, had their arms resting up on the turnbuckles. And he wanted to use the Dean almost as like a tongue-in-cheek character that would point these things out. And, the way that transpired or transpired in practice was that the guys, like in the clique and stuff, felt like they were, who was I to make fun of them or whatever. I wasn't making fun of them. I was pointing out what Vince wanted pointed out in their performances. And but as soon as I saw the costume and I saw the vignettes that he was doing, I knew the character had no chance of getting over.
I'm going to wrap this up. Is there anything else you'd like to promote?
No, just to say that we have two major announcements to make in the very near future. Next week at WrestleCon, we'll be making a big announcement, me and the fellow producers of Pro Wrestlers vs. Zombies. And very shortly after that, having the announcement of this new company. And, I think both of those things, I wish I could speak more publicly right now about the wrestling company because the timing is so perfect. But we're just going to wait until we have the exact right time, that we have all the pieces in the puzzle. Right now we've got multiple letters of intent out to talent, over 60. And we also are, the next thing we have to do is sit down and structure the company. So once we get to that point, we can make the public announcement about it. I think wrestling fans and others are going to be very surprised and happy to hear what they hear.
Yeah, it seems WrestleMania weekend, although Vince and company seem to hate it, every professional wrestling company or someone who has the dealings with it, they all announce their big thing that goes on because this is when the whole fan base and the whole world cares about wrestling. Right,
exactly. And, Vince has gotten smart. Back in 2005 when we did Hardcore Homecoming, there was only one other thing going on that weekend. Ring of Honor was having a show on Saturday, and we had our show on Friday. But Vince has gotten smart because he saw the success of those companies. Hardcore Homecoming in 2005 sold out a $150,000 gate in 6 hours. Vince realizes now that there is money to be made that weekend, has that WrestleMania experience and everything else. Very smart move on his part, but where he's still weak is when the spotlight gets put on his program, when the WrestleMania airs, and from what I'm understanding, when they had Batista go over in the match in Pittsburgh, I guess the Pittsburgh fans all but mutinied on the finish, and that's a pretty telltale sign that your booking's not doing what it's supposed to do, and so trying to monopolize all the time when you don't really have something to say can be bad. But clearly, the wrestling business knows that WrestleMania weekend is when, like you said, all the eyes are upon it.
Right. Everything. Well, thank you for your time, and see you at WrestleCon.
All right, yeah, please say hello down there. It'd be fun.
All right, will do. Thank you.
Appreciate it, Matthew. Thank you very much.
Thanks to Shane Douglas for stopping by. Pro Wrestlers vs. Zombies will be released March 28th, and if you're in town WrestleMania week, you can check it out in theaters April 3rd at a live screening at the Britannia featuring director Cody Knotts and Matt Hardy. You can check out more information on Pro Wrestlers vs. Zombies at ProWrestlersVsZombies.com.